There is a kind of discipline that doesn't care how you feel. It doesn't ask if you're motivated. It doesn't wait for inspiration. It simply says, this is what must be done, and then does it again and again, even when your whole body screams to stop. The Japanese once gave that discipline a spine and a sword and called it Bushido. You sitting here with your unfinished projects and half-kept promises are not so different from a young samurai who once stood on a windy hill and realized that duty, not desire, would decide who he became. His name was Takao. He was born in the late Sengoku period, when Japan was still a patchwork of warring domains, and a man's life could end between one breath and the next. The air of his childhood smelled of steel and smoke. Men spoke in lowered voices about battles, about honor, about betrayals. In the evenings when the cicadas screamed and the sake cups clinked faintly, the older samurai would tell stories of warriors who fought to the last breath, who chose death rather than dishonor, who walked into hopeless battles with calm faces because their code mattered more than their pulse. Takao listened with wide eyes, heart pounding. He thought Bushido meant glory. He thought it meant riding into battle with banners flying, winning duels being remembered. What he didn't understand, what no boy ever truly understands, is that Bushido begins in the smallest, least glorious places, in how you hold a wooden sword, when your arms are shaking in whether you show up to training, when the rain turns the ground into mud, and whether you obey an order that makes you silently furious. His father, Masanori, was a samurai of few words and fewer indulgences. He served Lord Ishida, a minor daimyo, under a larger clan, and had spent most of his life on battlefields that stained his armor with mud and memory. When Takao turned 13, Masanori placed a buchan in his hands and said, "From today, you are no longer a child. You are someone whose weakness can kill others. Remember that when you are tempted to be lazy, training began before sunrise, while the sky was still a deep indigo, and the mist clung to the rice fields. Takao rose from his thin futon and tied his hair back with clumsy fingers. His body wanted to stay in the warmth. His mind whispered, just a little longer. But his father's footsteps were already moving through the house. And there is something you begin to understand when your life belongs to a code your wants are negotiable. Your duty is not. They trained in a small clearing behind the family home where bamboo rustled like whispered prayers. Masanori's style was unforgiving. If Takao dropped his stance, his father struck his calves with the bakken. If his guard fell, his knuckles met wood. If his focus drifted for even a heartbeat, if his eyes flicked to a bird, if his mind wandered to breakfast, the tip of his father's sword would stop a hair's breadth from his throat. The moment you leave the present, Masanori said, you die. The enemy does not wait for you to finish your thoughts. At first, Takao resented him. His muscles burned. Blisters formed on his palms and then broke, leaving raw patches that stung when he gripped the sword. Some days, he wanted to scream that it was too much, that he was just a boy, that he was tired. But when he looked up, he saw his father's expression, not cruel, not angry, just unyielding. A mountain doesn't apologize for being hard to climb. Bushido doesn't apologize for being hard to live. You know that look too, in a different way. It's the blank face of the task you keep avoiding. The spreadsheet, the workout, the difficult conversation. It doesn't move towards you. It doesn't chase you. It simply waits like a battlefield for you to decide whether you are the kind of person who shows up or the kind who invents reasons not to. One autumn evening, after hours of drills, Takao finally snapped. His arms were heavy as stone sweat soaked his kimono, and his legs shook from holding stances longer than seemed human. When his father called for another round, Takao blurted, "You were already born strong. I'm not like you. The words tasted bitter the moment they left his mouth. Masanori stopped mid-step. For a long moment, only the wind moved. Then, his father spoke, voice quiet but sharp. You think I was born strong? He untied his sleeves and rolled them back, revealing forearms crisscrossed with faded scars. These are not gifts. They are the interest paid on every excuse I refuse to make. He stepped closer, eyes hardening. Bushido is not in your blood. It is in your choices. When you say, I'm not like you, what you really mean is, I don't want to pay the same price. Takao felt his face flush with shame. He looked away, swallowing hard. Masanori placed the bucket back in his hands. Again, he said, this time, not as a boy who wishes, but as a man who decides. From that evening, something shifted. The training did not become easier, but Takao stopped secretly bargaining with it. You've done that, haven't you? That quiet negotiation in your mind. I'll work hard, but only if it feels meaningful. I'll be disciplined, but only when I'm in the mood. Bushido cuts that negotiation in half. It tells you, decide who you are. First feelings can catch up later. Years passed. The boy's body grew into a man's frame. His shoulders broadened. His movements sharpened, his strikes became less wild and more precise. Yet the world outside remained unstable. Rumors traveled along the roads like restless ghosts, a neighboring clan plotting rebellion, a lord assassinated in his sleep, an army marching north. Lord Ishida's retainers met more frequently behind closed doors. Masanori began polishing his armor in silence at night. Or the true test of any samurai's Bushido was coming. Takao knew this not only from the whispers, but from the change in his father's eyes. Masanori had always carried a calm heaviness, the weight of someone who had seen too much to be impressed by fantasy. Now that weight deepened. One night, as they sat by the dim glow of an oil lamp, Takao asked Otu-san, "Are you afraid?" Masanori considered the question. Then he shook his head. "Fear is a body's reaction," he said. "I feel it, but it does not decide. Duty decides." Takao stared at the flickering flame. "What if duty asks you to do something you hate?" Masanori replied without hesitation. Then Bushido asks, "Which do you honor, your feelings or your oath?" He looked directly at his son. "If you choose your feelings, you may still live, but you will know it was not truly as a samurai. You might think this sounds extreme, but strip away the armor and swords, and it's the same crossroads you face when your alarm rings early, when your to-do list stares at you, when temptation offers you comfort instead of growth. Every time you choose the easy thing over the necessary thing, a small part of you steps away from your own code, even if you've never written it down." The war came in the spring. The cherry blossoms had only just begun to fall. When the messenger arrived, an enemy clan had crossed the border, burning farmhouses, seizing fields, testing Lord Ishida's resolve. The retainers were summoned. Armor was strapped on, banners unfurled like silent screams against the dawn. Takao watched as men he had grown up seeing as unshakable now tightened their jawlines and adjusted their grips on their spears. Nobody looked heroic. They looked committed. For the first time, Takao would ride out as a full samurai, not just a trainee. His father helped him into his cuirass, each plate of lacquered metal cold against his skin. As Masanori tied the cords, he said, "Remember what your body does not want to remember. Bushido is not about winning. It is about doing what is right, even when you lose." Takao swallowed. "And if I die?" Masanori paused, hands resting momentarily on his son's shoulders. then die as a man whose choices matched his code. Very few people can say that even if they live long lives. They marched for 2 days through fields and low hills until they reached the contested valley. Smoke still rose from a distant farmhouse. The enemy had fortified a ridge overlooking the main road. Ishida's army made camp among the pines while scouts reported back. That night, Takao lay awake beneath a rough woven blanket, listening to the quiet clink of armor, the low murmur of soldiers praying the rustle of leaves. He felt fear coil low in his stomach. His mind raced through possible scenarios: glory, failure, survival, death. But beneath the storm of thoughts, there was a thin line of steel. Whatever comes, I will not disgrace my father. I will not disgrace my Lord. I will not disgrace myself. At dawn, horns sounded. The sky blushed with the first light as the two forces arranged themselves. Banners snapped in the wind. Takao stood in the second row, spear in hand, heart pounding so hard he could feel it echo in his fingers. Across the field, the enemy lines shimmered. They were not monsters. They were men, just like him. Men with fathers, mothers' children. Men whose hearts were also pounding. It struck him that Bushido did not make you less human. It simply demanded that you act according to something greater than survival. The battle was brutal and confusing. The first clash of forces sent a shockwave through his body. Steel rang against steel. Men shouted, screamed, fell. The smell of blood and churned earth filled his nostrils. Training took over. His mind narrowed to the space in front of him. He parried, thrust, stepped, turned. Time fractured into moments of pure reaction. Once he saw his father in the distance, cutting down an enemy rider with a single precise strike. His movements, economical and deadly. Takao's lungs burned. His arms ached, but he did not retreat. Duty held his feet where fear wanted to run. When the enemy finally began to break, Lord Ishida's forces pressed forward. Victory seemed within reach until a desperate enemy unit cut off from their main line turned and charged toward the unprotected villagers who had gathered on a nearby hill, watching with terrified eyes. Takao saw it happen. As if in slow motion, a cluster of spearmen breaking away, sprinting toward people who had no shields, no armor, no chance. And there in the chaos, Bushido stopped being a word and became a choice. The signal flag from Ishida's aide commanded the right flank. Takao's position to hold formation and continue pressing the main enemy force. Abandoning the line to help the villagers would leave their own troops exposed. Obeying meant security for the army, but almost certain slaughter for the innocents on the hill. Disobeying meant breaking the code of obedience. A single heartbeat, 2 paths, duty to his Lord, duty to the helpless, both written into the same code. Takao's grip tightened on his spear. His father's voice echoed in his mind. Which do you honor, your feelings or your oath? His own heart answered with a question even sharper. What is an oath for if not to protect those who cannot protect themselves? On that ridge, between screams and banners and the cold edge of steel, the young samurai realized that Bushido was not a clean, simple road. It was a blade double-edged, merciless, demanding that you cut away your illusions and decide who you truly serve. And in the next breath, he made a choice that would change the rest of his life. Takao did not think. He moved. His legs carried him out of formation before his mind could construct arguments for or against the decision. One moment, he was part of the disciplined second row. The next, he was sprinting across the torn battlefield, weaving between fallen bodies and shattered spears, heading toward the hill where the villagers huddled together like frightened birds. Behind him, someone shouted his name. Another barked in order, but the roar of battle swallowed their voices. Bushido lived inside Takao, not as a rule, but as a heartbeat. The enemy spearmen were halfway up the hill when Takao reached the base. He saw terror on the villagers' faces. Old men gripping wooden sticks they knew were useless mothers shielding children with trembling arms, a single young boy trying to stand in front of his siblings, even though his knees shook visibly under him. Takao's lungs burned from the sprint, but his steps did not stop. He positioned himself between the villagers and the oncoming attackers, spear-leveled posture low. He shouted not out of rage, but to anchor himself in the moment. You will not touch them. The enemy hesitated not out of fear at first, but confusion. Why would a lone samurai break rank to defend peasants? Why would a warrior abandon strategy for compassion? But hesitation in battle is a crack, and Takao stepped into it. He thrust forward with the speed of a man whose training had been carved into his muscles. The first spearman fell. The others surged with anger, their formation tightening into a wedge meant to pierce through him. Takao inhaled, grounding himself. He let his father's teachings flow through his limbs. Center low eyes, quiet breath steady. Their spears lunged toward him in a barrage of gleaming tips. He moved like someone who had abandoned the idea of self-preservation. Not recklessly, but with absolute clarity. Bushido teaches that when you stop clinging to life, your actions sharpen. Every strike he made found a seam in armor. Every step was instinct. The clang of steel against steel rang through the valley like hard rain. Pain erupted along his left shoulder as a spear grazed him, ripping through the cloth and skin. But Takao didn't falter. He pivoted, sweeping the shaft of his spear across the legs of the attacker, knocking him down. Another enemy rushed him from the side. Takao twisted his body, letting the blow scrape past him, and drove his weapon into the man's chest with a controlled but deadly thrust. Still they kept coming. From the corner of his eye, Takao saw the villagers pulling back further up the hill. Good. Their fear gave him strength. Their trust, silent and desperate, hardened his resolve. He would not allow death to reach them, not while he still drew breath. A sudden shout pierced the chaos. Takao turned in time to see one attacker breaking away, sprinting toward a cluster of children on the right side of the hill. Takao's heart lurched. His body moved before thought returned. He raised his spear, stepped forward. Pain flared hot in his wounded shoulder and sprinted across the incline. The slope was slippery with loose soil and crushed grass. His foot slipped once, but he caught himself. The enemy was almost upon the children. Takao roared. The enemy turned at the sound, surprise flickering across his face. Takao swung the spear with both hands. The blow struck the man across the ribs, sending him tumbling down the hillside. Takao staggered from the force, but didn't fall. He planted the spear into the earth and forced himself upright. More enemies approached. There was no time to think, no time to fear, only duty. A whistle cut through the air so sharp and sudden that the fighting paused for a heartbeat. Takao's eyes snapped toward the sound. At the base of the hill stood Masanori, his father, blood on his armor, a long gash along his temple. His face was stern, unreadable, but his voice carried the full weight of command. Takao, hold. Takao froze. The enemy spearmen, sensing an opportunity, rushed again. But before they reached him, Masanori charged up the hill with 3 retainers crashing into the attackers with a ferocity that drew gasps from the villagers. Masanori fought like a man who had spent decades making peace with death. Every strike was efficient, every motion stripped of hesitation. His blade cut down the spearman with grim precision. Takao stepped back, panting heavily, gripping his spear with trembling hands. The last enemy fell beneath Masanori's sword. Silence spread heavy, fragile. Only the wind moved through the tall grass. Masanori turned to face his son. Takao straightened, bracing himself. Anger, disappointment, punishment. The young samurai's heart hammered in his chest. Masanori walked toward him, slow and deliberate. When he reached Takao, he stared hard into his son's eyes. "What you did," Masanori said quietly, "was disobedience." Takao swallowed hard, feeling heat rise behind his eyes. Then his father placed a hand on his shoulder, the wounded one, and squeezed. But it was honorable disobedience. Takao blinked, stunned. Masanori's voice softened, almost imperceptibly. A samurai does not protect only his lord. He protects the weak, the frightened, the ones who cannot lift a blade. He looked toward the villagers, who were staring at them with gratitude and awe. "You upheld the heart of Bushido, even when you broke its form." Takao felt his throat tighten. His father wasn't angry. He was proud. But pride is not a shield against consequences. The battle had ended, but the hierarchy of a clan did not bend easily. When they returned to Lord Ishida's camp, the daimyo summoned Takao immediately. The lord sat beneath a white banner, embroidered with his family crest, flanked by advisors with stern expressions. His eyes, sharp and dark, rested on Takao with a mixture of curiosity and calculation. "You left your post," Ishida stated without emotion. Takao knelt deeply. "I did, my lord." "You endangered the cohesion of the flank." "Yes, my lord." "You acted without permission." "Yes, my lord." Ishida tilted his head slightly. Takao lifted his gaze, but only enough to show sincerity without disrespect. "Because the villagers would have been slaughtered, and because I believed that protecting them was the truest expression of the code you have entrusted to us." Silence. The retainers whispered among themselves. Some nodded faintly, others frowned. Masanori stood at the far end of the tent, stone still. Ishida finally broke the silence. "You are young," he said. Young samurai often mistake impulse for honor. Takao's stomach twisted. But sometimes, Ishida continued, youth sees clearly what age has obscured. The young samurai's breath caught. "Rise," Lord Ishida commanded. Takao stood. "You will not be punished," the Lord said. "But understand this. Bushido requires a mind that can hold two truths at once, obedience and compassion. Too much of one becomes tyranny. Too much of the other becomes weakness." His gaze sharpened. "Learn balance." Takao bowed deeply, relief and humility flooding through him. That night, while the camp settled into uneasy rest, Takao sat alone by a small fire, staring into the flames. His shoulder throbbed. Dirt and blood still clung to his armor. The weight of the day of choices made and consequences faced pressed heavily on him. His father approached, lowering himself to sit beside him. For a long time, neither spoke. Finally, Masanori said, "You did today what many grown samurai fail to do. You chose a burden that was not yours because it was right." Takao exhaled shakily. "I didn't know if I was doing the right thing." His father nodded. "Bushido is not clarity. It is courage. Courage to act even when you cannot see the full danger. Courage to accept the cost afterward." Takao closed his eyes. "I was afraid." Masanori smiled faintly. "Good. A warrior without fear is already dead." The firelight flickered across their faces, painting them in gold and shadow. Around them, the camp quieted. The night deepened. Takao did not know what trials awaited him next, but something had solidified inside him, like a blade cooling into its final form. He understood now that Bushido was not a path of perfection, but a path of weight. Every choice cut in two directions. Every duty demanded sacrifice. And every act of courage left a mark not on the battlefield, but on the man who survived it. Tomorrow would bring new orders, new challenges, new tests of obedience and resolve. But tonight, for the first time, Takao felt like a samurai, not because he fought, but because he chose. The days after the battle passed in a blur of marching rebuilding and quiet tension. Though Lord Ishida's forces had driven the enemy back across the valley, everyone felt the war was far from over. Scouts reported enemy regrouping in the north. Villagers rebuilt their burned homes with trembling hands. The air felt heavy, as if the land itself held its breath. Takao tried to return to routine maintaining weapons, patrolling, assisting wounded soldiers, but something had shifted inside him. The battle had carved a line across the map of his life. Before it, the boy who trained under his father's stern eyes. After it, the man who had chosen duty, not because it was commanded, but because he felt its weight in his bones. His wound healed slowly, leaving a dark scar along his shoulder. Masanori examined it one evening and said, "Scars are the receipts of your decisions. This one says you did not run." Takao nodded, but his mind drifted back to the villagers' faces, frightened, hopeful, grateful, and to the moment he had nearly died defending them. Sometimes, at night, he heard echoes of that moment, the rush of footsteps, the scream of steel, the ragged breath in his own chest. But beneath those sounds, he also heard something new, a quieter voice, a voice that said, "You did not betray yourself." One morning, a messenger arrived at camp with urgent news. Lord Ishida gathered his retainers in a portable command tent. His face was stern, his jaw set in stone. "The enemy," he began, "has taken hostages." A ripple of anger passed through the room. "Villagers from the northern hamlets," Ishida continued, "children among them." His eyes darkened. "They demand we withdraw from the valley. If we do not, they will execute the hostages." Takao felt something twist in his chest. He swallowed hard. "My lord," he said softly. "How many?" 32, Ishida replied. Taken from 3 villages, the retainers erupted in murmurs. Some argued that the clan could not give in to threats. Others insisted that innocent blood would stain their honor permanently. The debate grew heated. Ishida listened in silence, fingers tapping the arm of his seat. Finally, he raised a hand. The room quieted. "We cannot abandon the valley," he said. "If we retreat, the enemy will advance deeper into our lands. More lives will be lost." He looked around the room, meeting each samurai's gaze. "But we also cannot allow hostages to die under our watch." Takao felt the air thicken. The unspoken truth hung between them. There was no clean answer. Bushido lived in impossible choices. Ishida continued, "We need a small group to infiltrate the enemy camp and rescue the hostages before dawn tomorrow. It will be dangerous. Many who go may not return." He paused. "I will not command volunteers. They must choose." Silence. Heavy, thick as armor. Then Masanori stepped forward. "I will go." Takao felt his breath catch. Masanori, the man who had survived more battles than most could imagine, was not choosing out of pride. He was choosing because he believed duty did not allow him to stay behind. Takao took one step forward. "I will go as well." Masanori turned sharply. "Takao." Otusan Takao interrupted quietly. "You taught me that a life without honor is not a life. I cannot stay behind while you walk into danger alone." Their eyes locked. Masanori's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Pride, fear, acceptance, all woven together. Finally, he nodded once. "Then we go together." A third volunteer joined them, a middle-aged samurai named Ibara, known for his quiet intensity. And with that, the team was formed, 3 men against an entire enemy encampment. That night, before they departed, Takao wrote a letter. Not to his father, who would be walking beside him, but to his mother and younger sister at home. He wrote slowly, choosing each word as if it were his last. He thanked them for their love, apologized for his distance, promised to live and die by the code he inherited. When he finished, he tied the letter with a thin cord and gave it to a messenger. "Deliver it only if I do not return." The messenger bowed as Takao watched him disappear into the darkness. A strange calm settled over him. Fear did not vanish, but it dissolved into something steadier. He was not walking into death. He was walking into duty. And duty was the spine that kept a samurai standing even when the world trembled. They left at moonrise. Masanori led them through the forest with sure steps, despite the darkness. Takao moved behind him, senses sharp ears tuned to every whisper of wind. Ibara covered the rear, scanning the shadows with practiced vigilance. The forest seemed alive. Branches, creaked leaves rustled, distant owls cried in the night. But Takao did not flinch. The battlefield had tempered something in him. He was no longer the boy who sought comfort. He was the man who sought clarity. After hours of silent movement, they reached a ridge overlooking the enemy encampment. Torches flickered like fireflies pinned to the earth. Soldiers wandered lazily near the perimeter. Hostages, bound but alive, were held in a makeshift hut at the camp's center. Masanori crouched low. "We move in 3 stages," he whispered. "First I draw the guards by the east gate away. Then Takao cuts the bonds and leads the hostages toward the river. Ibara will clear the path behind him." He turned to his son. "You must be fast. If one guard raises the alarm, all 32 villagers die." Takao nodded, pulse steady. "I understand." They descended. Masanori slipped through the shadows like a ghost. Moments later, a shout rang from the east side of the camp. His father's voice, sharp and commanding. Several guards sprinted toward the noise. Takao moved. He glided between tents, staying low, heart pounding rhythmically in his ears. At the hut's entrance, one guard remained a burly man, leaning against a wooden post. Takao knew he could not risk noise. He picked up a small stone and tossed it into the bushes behind the guard. The man turned confused. Takao struck. One swift motion. The guard crumpled silently. Takao slipped inside the hut. The villagers gasped softly when they saw him, their eyes wide with terror, focused on the curved sword at his hip. Quiet Takao whispered, "I am here to take you home." He moved quickly, cutting the bonds of the nearest captives. A little girl clung to him. A wounded elder struggled to stand. Takao lifted him onto his back without hesitation. Outside, Ibara dispatched a patrolling soldier with a precise strike. The escape route remained clear. "Go," Takao whispered. "Move fast, stay low." The villagers stumbled out of the hut, clinging to each other as they followed Ibara toward the river. Takao guided the last few out until he heard footsteps approaching. Fast. Multiple. He turned. An enemy patrol had returned early. 4 soldiers stared at him, eyes narrowing. One recognized him. "It's the samurai from the hill." Takao stepped forward, placing himself between the soldiers and the fleeing villagers. His voice was calm. "You will not pass." They charged. Takao met them with the quiet ferocity of a man who had already accepted the weight of his death. His blade flashed in the pale moonlight. Steel met steel. Sparks burst in the darkness. 2 soldiers fell. The third drove a spear toward Takao's ribs. Takao twisted the blade, scraped his armor, the pain sharp but not deep. He countered, slashing across the man's thigh. He turned to face the 4th soldier, but pain exploded in his side. A hidden attacker emerged from behind a tent and stabbed him with a short blade. Takao gasped, knees buckling. The enemy drew back for a second strike. Before he could deliver it, Masanori appeared like lightning, cutting the attacker down in a single fluid motion. Takao collapsed. His father knelt beside him, blood on his hands as he pressed them to the wound. "Takao, stay awake." Takao forced his eyes open. "Did they escape?" Ibara's voice came from behind them. "Yes, All of them are across the river. Takao exhaled shakily, relief softening his features. Masanori's face twisted with pain. Not physical pain, but something deeper. "You foolish boy," he whispered. "Why must your bravery always try to outrun your body?" Takao smiled faintly. "Because you taught me that a samurai chooses duty, even when it hurts." Masanori's eyes glistened in the moonlight. "We're not done," Ibara said urgently. "We must move before reinforcements arrive." Masanori lifted Takao onto his back. The young samurai groaned, but the world remained clear around him. He watched the sky between the trees, vast, dark, eternal. A strange peace washed over him. They fled into the forest as enemy shouts erupted behind them. Arrows sliced through the air. Masanori zigzagged between trees. Ibara deflected a stray arrow with his scabbard. When they finally reached Ishida's camp, the villagers were weeping with gratitude. Soldiers rushed to carry Takao to the healer's tent. His vision blurred. His breath grew shallow. But he heard one sound clearly: applause, not cheers. Applause from hardened samurai who understood what it meant to risk everything for people who had no power. Takao closed his eyes. He woke days later. The wound had been treated. His father sat beside him, silent but steadfast. When Takao stirred, Masanori let out a breath he had been holding. "Takao," he said, voice rough, "you live." Takao swallowed. "The villagers are safe." "Yes," Masanori whispered, "because of you." Weeks later, when Takao was strong enough to walk, Lord Ishida summoned him again. This time, the Lord did not sit behind guards or advisors. He stood alone before a small altar. "You disobeyed." "Twice," Ishida said calmly. "And twice your disobedience saved lives." He turned to look at the young samurai. Bushido is not blind obedience. It is the discipline to uphold honor even when it costs you comfort, safety, or approval. He picked up a lacquered box and held it out. "You have earned this." Inside was a short sword, a wakizashi, with a simple inscription on the blade: "Duty over desire." Takao bowed deeply. "I will serve you with everything I am." Ishida nodded. "You already have. Now serve yourself as well." That night, Takao stood beneath the full moon, the wakizashi at his side. The air smelled of pine and river water. He felt the weight of everything: pain, pride, exhaustion,